The alarms had not stopped for 6 hours. I stood on the command deck of my flagship, watching the blue and green marble of Earth fill the main viewport, and I felt something I had not felt in 300 years of service. I felt watched. My name is Vren Koth Solu, commander of the Thessari Second Armada. Behind me, arranged in perfect formation across 400,000 kilometers of open space, sat 12,000 warships. Each one carried enough power to turn a city to ash in seconds. Together, we were the largest fleet ever assembled by our people, sent to deliver a message that had never once been refused. I opened the channel myself. I always did. It was tradition, and traditions were the only thing that made conquest feel less like slaughter and more like inevitability. People of Earth, I said, and my voice was carried through every screen, every radio, every device capable of receiving a signal on their planet. I am Commander Vren Koth Solu of the Thessari Dominion. You are surrounded by 12,000 warships. Resistance will not be considered. You will surrender your resources, your technology, and your sovereignty within the hour, or we will be forced to act. I had given this speech, or some version of it, 187 times before. Every time, the response had been the same: fear, compliance, sometimes tears. Never once had a species asked for more time. The reply came from a woman. Her voice was steady, almost gentle, the way a teacher speaks to a child who has asked a difficult question. This is Grace Whitfield, representing the Unified Earth Council. We would like 24 hours to speak with our people before we respond. I looked at my first officer, a broad-shouldered veteran named Doran, who had served with me since my earliest campaigns. His antennae twitched, a sign of confusion among my kind. "They are asking for time," he said, as if the words themselves were strange in his mouth. "They are afraid," I said. "Fear makes people slow to accept truth." I granted the delay. It cost us nothing. 12,000 ships did not need to hurry. For the first hour, everything on the planet below continued exactly as it had before our arrival. I found this curious. In every previous conquest, the target world had fallen into chaos within minutes of our ultimatum. Traffic stopped, markets closed, communication towers went dark, as governments scrambled to organize either resistance or surrender. Earth did none of this. I called up the surface feeds my intelligence officers had gathered from their public networks. Children were walking to school. A crowd gathered around a street performer in a city called Lisbon. Two men argued cheerfully over a football match in a bar in a place called Manchester. It was as if 12,000 warships were not currently blocking out their sun. "Sensors are picking up unusual activity," said my communications officer, a young Thessari named Issa. "Civilian shipping traffic has increased by 300% in the last hour." "Panic buying," I said. "It happens on every world before surrender. They hoard food, fuel, medicine." "It does not match that pattern, Commander," Issa said. "The traffic is not moving toward population centers. It is moving toward orbital stations. Old ones. Some of them have not been active in decades, according to our records." I dismissed it as scavenging, the desperate act of a species trying to salvage what little technology they had before we claimed it for ourselves. I had seen frightened populations do stranger things. I decided to use the remaining hours productively. I called up the full dossier on Earth that our scouts had compiled over the past 2 years of quiet observation. I had read the summary before arriving, the same brief overview I read before every campaign, listing population, military strength, technological level, and the probability of resistance. This time, for reasons I could not name, I asked for the complete file. What I found was strange. Humanity had fought among itself constantly. 2 world-spanning conflicts within the span of a single lifetime for their species. Weapons designed not for elegant conquest but for sheer, overwhelming destruction. Built not by governments alone but by individual engineers working in garages and basements. They had reached their moon using computers weaker than the device controlling my ship's coffee dispenser, and they had done it only decades after learning to fly. Their history was not one of unity. It was one of stubborn, constant, uncoordinated defiance. Every time one group of humans decided something was impossible, another group of humans built it anyway, out of spite, out of curiosity, out of simple refusal to be told no. "Commander," Doran said, standing beside me as I read, "why does this trouble you?" "Because in 187 campaigns," I said, "I have never faced a species that treated defeat as a suggestion rather than a fact." He said nothing. There was nothing reassuring to say. I spent the remaining hours watching Earth continue its ordinary rhythm beneath us. Sports games were broadcast. Weather reports aired without alteration, mentioning a storm system forming over an ocean called the Atlantic, as though this mattered more than our presence. A late-night comedy program made a joke about our fleet, and the audience laughed. I began to suspect that I was witnessing either the strangest form of denial in galactic history or something else entirely. I did not know which possibility unsettled me more. At the 23rd hour, I ordered Yisa to run a full diagnostic on our sensor net surrounding the planet. She reported everything functioning within normal parameters. 12,000 ships, each one watching for any sign of military mobilization, any hidden weapon platform, any indication of a coordinated defense. There was none. No new warships, no shifting of ground-based weapons, no unusual troop movements, only ordinary civilian life continuing beneath us, and that strange, steady increase in old orbital stations receiving visitors. "Perhaps they truly have no defense," Doran offered. "Perhaps this delay was simply to say goodbye to their families." I wanted to believe this. It would have been simpler. At the 24th hour, precisely on time, the channel opened again. Grace Whitfield's face appeared on my screen for the first time. She looked to be perhaps 40 years of age by human standards, dark-haired, calm-eyed, sitting in what looked like an ordinary office rather than a command bunker. Behind her, through a window, I could see a city skyline, untouched, ordinary, alive. "Commander Koth Solu," she said, "thank you for your patience." "You have had your time," I said. "What is Earth's answer?" She smiled, and it was not the smile of someone facing annihilation. It was the smile of someone who already knew how a conversation would end before it began. "Capitulate," she said. For a moment, I felt something close to relief, the word I had heard so many times before, from so many broken and surrendering worlds. I began to nod, already composing the formal acceptance of their surrender in my mind. Then I saw her expression did not change. She was not looking at me with the defeated eyes of a beaten species. She was looking at me the way a person looks at someone who has not yet realized the trap has already closed around them. "I do not understand," I said slowly. "Explain your terms." "There are no terms to explain, Commander," she said. The word was not meant for us. The channel went dark, and in that same instant, every alarm on my ship began to scream at once. I turned toward Issa's station, and I watched the color drain from her face as she stared at her readings. "Commander," she said, her voice thin and tight, "I am detecting thousands of new signals across the system. They were not there a moment ago. They are activating simultaneously." I looked at the tactical display, and for the first time in 300 years of service, I did not understand what I was looking at. The old stations, the scattered satellites, the scavenged relics we had dismissed as harmless debris and outdated equipment. Every single one of them, spread across the entire system, was coming online at once, and every single one of them was turning to face us. I had commanded fleets through 187 campaigns, and in every one of them, the moment before the true nature of a battle revealed itself, carried a particular kind of silence. This silence was different. It was not the quiet of a beaten enemy gathering courage. It was the quiet of a trap closing exactly as planned. "Report," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Issa's hands moved across her console faster than I had ever seen them move. "Commander, the signals are not weapons platforms in the traditional sense. They are relay stations, communication nodes, sensor arrays. I count over 4,000 separate sources, and the number is still climbing." "4,000 sources of what?" I demanded. "Targeting data," she said. They are sharing targeting data with each other, with something else. I cannot locate the primary receiver. Doran stepped closer to the display, his broad frame tense. Are these weapons, Commander? I do not believe so, I said, though the truth of it was more unsettling than a simple answer could capture. I believe they are eyes. I ordered every ship in the Armada to raise defensive shields and prepare for immediate maneuvering. 12,000 vessels, moving in practiced formation, should have been able to respond to any threat within seconds. That was the entire purpose of an armada that size. No single point of failure. No weakness that could not be covered by 100 other ships. What I had not accounted for was the possibility that our size itself could become the weakness. Commander, Yissa said, her voice rising in pitch. Communication between our ships is degrading. The 4th Squadron reports interference. The 9th Squadron cannot raise the 12th. I am losing contact with outer formations. I felt a cold understanding begin to form, the same understanding that must have crept over every conquered species in the moment before the truth became clear to them. They are not attacking our ships, I said slowly. They are attacking the space between our ships. Doran turned to me, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw something like alarm in his eyes. 12,000 ships cannot function as an armada if they cannot speak to one another. No, I said. They become 12,000 individual targets instead. I ordered an immediate return to a tighter formation, hoping proximity would restore our communication network. It was the correct tactical decision by every principle I had been trained in. It was also, I would come to understand within the hour, exactly what our opponents had wanted us to do. As our ships drew closer together, the old satellites and relay stations scattered throughout the system continued their quiet work, feeding information into a web I could not see and could not intercept. I called for a full scan of the debris field surrounding Earth, the same debris field my scouts had catalogued 2 years earlier and dismissed as harmless remnants of a species too primitive to threaten us. The scan results arrived, and I understood, at last, what I had truly been looking at all along. What we had recorded as abandoned mining rigs were, in fact, still operational, their hulls simply painted to appear rusted and inactive. What we had logged as decommissioned communication satellites carried active processing cores far more advanced than their outer casing suggested. Even the debris, the scattered fragments of old rocket stages and defunct probes that our sensors had flagged as inert junk, carried small transmitters, each one silent until this exact moment. Humanity had spent decades quietly building a network hidden in plain sight, disguised as the ordinary detritus of a species that explored space without ever fully cleaning up after itself. We had seen a graveyard of old technology. We had, in truth, been walking through a minefield the entire time, and we had called it debris. Commander, Issa said, I am picking up movement from several of the largest structures. They are reconfiguring. On the main display, I watched as 3 orbital platforms, structures we had identified as abandoned space stations from an earlier era of human expansion, unfolded panels I had assumed were simply broken solar arrays. Beneath those panels, something else emerged, something our scans had never detected because it had never been active before this moment. What are those? Doran asked, though I suspected he already understood the answer would not comfort him. I do not know, I admitted, but I believe we are about to find out. I ordered the fleet to increase distance from the largest concentration of structures, but the order came too late for several of our forward scouting vessels. I watched, helpless, as 3 of our smaller ships lost all sensor capability at once, their screens flooding with false readings, their navigation systems reporting positions that did not match their actual location. They had not been destroyed. They had been blinded. They are using our own systems against us, Yissa said, disbelief coloring her voice. The interference pattern matches our own communication protocols. Commander, I believe they have been studying our fleet's technology since before we even arrived in this system. I thought back to the 2 years of quiet observation my scouts had conducted before this campaign, the careful, patient reconnaissance that was standard practice before any Thessari invasion. I had assumed we were the only ones watching. I understood now with growing unease, that we had never been watching alone. "Commander," Doran said quietly, "if they have studied us for years, then everything we know about them may be equally outdated. What if this is not their full strength, but only what they were willing to show us during our observation?" I did not answer him, because I did not want to consider the possibility that our 2 years of careful scouting had, in truth, been 2 years of humanity quietly cataloging us in return. I opened a direct channel to Earth, hoping to reach Grace Whitfield again, hoping to understand the shape of what was happening before it consumed my entire fleet. The channel connected, but her voice did not answer immediately. Instead, I heard the calm, steady tone of an automated message, repeating in a language our translation systems rendered easily enough. "This is a recorded message from the Unified Earth Council. Commander Koth Solu, if you are receiving this, please understand that no harm is intended toward your crews at this time. We ask only that you cease all forward movement and await further instruction." "They ask us to surrender," Doran said, disbelief plain in his voice, as though our positions were reversed. "Perhaps," I said slowly, "our positions already are." I ordered a full retreat to a defensive perimeter, gathering our remaining functional squadrons into the tightest formation our protocols allowed. Around us, the strange network of hidden stations, disguised satellites, and reactivated debris continued its silent work, and I understood, with a dread I had never experienced in 3 centuries of service, that this was not the beginning of a battle. It was the closing of a trap that had been built years before we ever arrived, patient and quiet, waiting only for the moment we grew comfortable enough to walk into its center. I looked out at the 12,000 ships under my command, once the largest and most feared fleet in Thessari history, and for the first time, I did not see an unstoppable force. I saw 12,000 pieces on a board that had never truly been ours to play. There is a moment every commander fears more than defeat itself. It is the moment when the enemy stops behaving like an enemy and starts behaving like something you cannot predict at all. I reached that moment somewhere in the second hour after the network around Earth came alive, and I have not forgotten it since. "Commander, the 9th Squadron is requesting emergency instructions," Issa said. "They report their navigation systems have placed them inside the orbit of the second moon, but their visual sensors show open space. They do not know which reading to trust." "Tell them to trust neither," I said. "Tell them to hold position using inertial guidance alone and wait for visual confirmation from a neighboring ship." It was a reasonable order. It assumed, however, that a neighboring ship's confirmation could still be trusted, and within minutes I learned that assumption was no longer safe to make. "Commander," Doran said, standing over a secondary display with an expression I had rarely seen on his face before. Genuine unease. "The 12th Squadron confirms visual contact with the 9th. They report seeing debris, wreckage." My chest tightened. "Casualties?" "That is the difficulty, Commander. The 9th Squadron itself reports no damage of any kind. They insist they are fully intact. The 12th insists they are staring at wreckage bearing the 9th's registry markings." I stood in silence for a long moment, trying to make sense of 2 truths that could not both be real. Then understanding arrived, cold and unwelcome. "They are not seeing wreckage," I said. "They are seeing an image, a projection, or a manipulation of their sensor feed, made to look exactly like our own ships in ruin." "For what purpose?" Doran asked. "To frighten us. To confuse us," I said. "To make every squadron doubt what every other squadron reports. An army that cannot trust its own eyes cannot act as one army at all." I ordered every ship to switch to a secondary confirmation protocol, a system requiring at least 3 independent sensor readings before any report could be treated as fact. It slowed our reaction time considerably, but it was the only way to prevent the fleet from tearing itself apart chasing phantoms of its own making. Even as I gave the order, I found myself wondering how long humanity had studied our sensor architecture to build something capable of exploiting it so precisely. 2 years. That was the length of our observation of them. I began to suspect their observation of us had lasted a great deal longer. I called for a full review of every prior contact our scouts had logged with human vessels, hoping to find some earlier warning sign we had missed. What I found instead unsettled me further. 11 years earlier, long before this campaign had even been proposed within Thessari Command, one of our unmanned probes had gone silent in a distant system, its last transmission showing an unremarkable human cargo vessel drifting nearby. The loss had been recorded as a mechanical failure and forgotten. I no longer believed that was the truth. "Commander," Yissa said, "I have identified the primary structure coordinating the interference. It appears to be an old station in high orbit above the northern hemisphere of the planet. Their own historical records label it as a retired research platform, decommissioned decades ago." "Show me," I said. The image appeared on the main display, an aging, unremarkable structure with peeling paint and dark, apparently powerless windows. It looked exactly like what it claimed to be, a monument to abandonment. "Sensors show minimal power output," Yissa continued, "yet somehow it is coordinating signals from thousands of separate sources across the system. I do not understand how a structure with such low visible power can manage so much processing." "Because the power is not visible," I said, understanding arriving slowly, painfully. "They have hidden their true output beneath a false reading, the same way they hid true movement beneath a false rec. Everything we have seen since our arrival may be exactly what they wanted us to see, and nothing more." I ordered a focused strike against the old station, hoping to sever the coordination point before it could do further damage to our formation. 6 of our cruisers moved to comply, breaking from the defensive perimeter to approach the structure directly. They never reached it. "Commander," Yissa said, her voice tight with alarm, "the 6 cruisers have lost engine function. All of them, simultaneously, at the same distance from the structure." "Boarding parties?" I asked. "Weapons fire?" "None detected," she said. "Their systems simply stopped responding to command input. It is as though the ships themselves have decided not to obey." I felt something close to disbelief settle over the command deck. "Ships do not disobey, Yissa. Something is intercepting the commands before they reach the engines." "I believe that is precisely what is happening," she said. "A signal embedded somewhere in the structure's design, keyed specifically to our command protocols. I do not know how they obtained our protocols to design such a thing." I did know, though I did not want to say it aloud. 11 years was a long time to study a language, if that language belonged to ships you had once found drifting silently through your own system, their crews unaware they had been observed at all. Doran approached me quietly, away from the others, and spoke in a low voice meant only for me. "Commander, I must ask what you are truly thinking, because I no longer believe following standard doctrine will serve us." I considered lying to him, offering false confidence the way command always expected of me. I found I did not have the strength for it. "I believe," I said, "that we did not arrive to conquer a frightened, disorganized species hiding beneath the weight of our reputation. I believe we arrived to conquer a species that has spent generations preparing quietly for exactly this day, disguising every tool of that preparation as something unremarkable, patient enough to wait until we grew comfortable enough to stop looking closely. Then what do? We do what any commander must do when the battlefield is no longer the one they trained for," I said. "We adapt, or we lose everything." I ordered the fleet to abandon the tight defensive formation entirely, scattering our ships into smaller, more independent groups, hoping to reduce our vulnerability to whatever coordinated interference the enemy had designed against a single massed target. It was a desperate measure, one that violated every principle of Thessari fleet doctrine, built as it was on the assumption that unity meant strength. For the first time, I wondered if unity, in this particular battle, meant only a larger target. As our ships spread apart across the system, I received a report that chilled me more than any weapon could have. Issa's voice, when she spoke, had lost its professional calm entirely. "Commander, I am detecting activity from Earth's surface itself. Not from orbit, from the ground." "Explain." "Radio telescopes, deep space listening arrays, the kind used for scientific research, are transmitting now, and transmitting with power output far beyond their stated capacity." I believe they are being used to jam long-range communication across the entire system, cutting off any possibility of us calling for reinforcement from beyond this system's boundary. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, allowing myself the smallest luxury of doubt before the crew could see it on my face. "They have thought of everything," I said quietly. "Not everything, Commander," Doran said. "They have not yet defeated us." I appreciated the sentiment, though I no longer felt certain it was true. I looked out at the scattered remains of my once unified armada, each group now isolated, each captain forced to make independent decisions without the comfort of central command, and I understood that the very thing which had made us the most feared fleet in known space, our overwhelming size, had become the exact weakness a patient, clever species had spent years designing a trap around. I opened a channel to every remaining ship under my command, knowing that some portion of the message would likely be intercepted, altered, or lost entirely before it reached its destination, and delivered the only order I had left to give. "This is Commander Kath Solu. All squadrons are to prioritize survival over engagement. Do not trust visual confirmation alone. Do not approach unfamiliar structures. Hold position and await further instruction." It was, I would later realize, the first time in the recorded history of the Thessari Dominion that a fleet commander had ordered caution instead of conquest. I did not know, in that moment, whether it made me wise or simply the first of many commanders who would learn, far too late, that some species did not need larger fleets to defeat an empire. They only needed patience and the willingness to let their enemy underestimate them for exactly as long as it took to close the trap. Below us, Earth continued to turn, calm and untroubled, as though it had known all along how this day would end. By the third hour, I no longer commanded an armada. I commanded a scattering of frightened captains, each one isolated, each one uncertain whether the orders reaching them had come from me or from something wearing my voice. "Commander," Issa said, her console flashing with reports faster than she could read them aloud. "The 3rd Squadron reports receiving new orders under your authorization code, instructing them to advance toward the planet's surface. I do not believe you issued that command." "I did not," I said. "Recall them immediately." "I am attempting to, Commander, but my recall message is being flagged by their systems as an unauthorized transmission. They believe the false order is the true one, and mine is the imposter." I felt something close to helplessness settle over me, an emotion I had not experienced since my earliest days as a junior officer, long before I had learned to mask uncertainty with confidence for the sake of the crews who depended on me. "How is this possible?" Doran demanded, standing at my side. "Our authorization codes are generated fresh for every campaign. No outside force should be able to replicate them." "They are not replicating them," I said, understanding arriving with the particular bitterness of a truth realized too late. "They are studying the pattern by which we generate them. If they have had access to our communications for as long as I now suspect, they may have learned to predict our codes before we ourselves finish generating them." I ordered an immediate shift to manual verification, requiring every captain to confirm orders through a secondary, older method our fleet had not used in generations, one too outdated and inefficient for any modern system to have anticipated. It was, I hoped, a method too primitive for even Earth's patient observation to have accounted for. For a short while, it worked. Communication stabilized. Scattered squadrons began reporting their positions with confidence restored. I allowed myself the smallest measure of hope, the first since Grace Whitfield's calm voice had delivered that single, devastating word. Then Issa's voice broke the fragile calm. "Commander, the 5th Squadron is requesting immediate assistance. Their engines have failed entirely, all 30 vessels, at the same moment, without warning. Cause? Unknown. Their internal diagnostics show no malfunction. Every system reports full function, yet none of it responds to command. Hide." I stared at the display showing the 5th Squadron's position, 30 warships drifting silently in the dark, each one a perfectly functioning vessel that had simply, collectively, stopped listening to the officers meant to command it. "This is not a weapon in any form I recognize," Doran said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It is something worse. It is patience, turned into a weapon. They did not need to destroy our ships. They only needed to convince our ships that we were no longer the ones giving the orders." I opened every remaining channel I still had access to, hoping to reach Earth directly, hoping to understand the shape of the trap well enough to find some way through it, before my entire fleet drifted into helpless silence around a planet that had never once raised a single weapon against us. Grace Whitfield's face appeared once more, calm as it had been from the very beginning, though I now understood that calm had never been comfort. It had been certainty. "Commander Kath Solu," she said, "I imagine your fleet is experiencing some difficulty." "You have crippled 12,000 warships without firing a single weapon," I said. "I would like to understand how." "We did not cripple your fleet, Commander," she said. "We simply removed the assumption your fleet relied upon. You believed size meant safety. You believed distance meant time to prepare. You believed that a species without a single unified government, without a single unified military, without even a single unified language, could not possibly coordinate a defense against an invading force of your scale." "And I was wrong," I said, the words leaving me before I could soften them. "You were not entirely wrong," she said, and for the first time, something like sympathy touched her expression. "We do not have one fleet, Commander. We never built one. What we built, over the better part of a century, is an entire civilization where every satellite, every research station, every piece of infrastructure launched into space carried a secondary purpose alongside its stated one. We did not build warships because we did not need to. We built a species that never fully trusted peace to last, and prepared accordingly, for longer than your dominion has known we existed." I looked out at my scattered, silent fleet, understanding at last the full shape of what had happened. We had catalogued Earth's space presence as scattered, uncoordinated, and primitive, the natural result of a divided species incapable of unified action. We had never considered that division itself could be a form of camouflage, each fragment of humanity's presence in space hiding a piece of a larger design that no single government needed to coordinate, because the design had been built quietly into the very habits of an entire civilization. "What do you want from us now?" I asked, because I no longer saw any purpose in pretending my position held any strength left to bargain from. "We want what we asked for from the beginning," she said. "We want you to leave, and we want your dominion to understand, clearly and permanently, that this world is not available for conquest. Not now, not in the future, not through any strength you might return with. And if I refuse—" Her expression did not change, and that absence of anger unsettled me more than any threat could have. "Then your fleet remains exactly where it is, Commander, until it no longer matters whether you refuse or not." I closed the channel and stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the tactical display showing squadron after squadron reporting some new form of failure, none of it violent, none of it destructive, all of it simply, methodically, removing my ability to command. "Commander," Doran said quietly, "what are your orders?" I thought of 187 campaigns, each one ending in the same word, spoken by frightened, defeated species who had never once imagined refusing us. I thought of the confidence with which I had delivered that same word to Earth, certain it would end their resistance before it had ever truly begun. I understood now that the word had never belonged to them at all. It had always, from the very first moment I spoke it, been waiting to return to me. "Open every remaining channel," I said. "I wish to speak with Earth's negotiator myself, without delay, and without further pretense of strength I no longer hold." Doran hesitated only a moment before complying, and as the channel opened once more, I felt the full weight of 300 years of Thessari conquest settle onto a single, unavoidable truth. We had come to deliver an ultimatum to a species we believed too fractured to resist us. We had found, instead, a species that had spent generations quietly ensuring that the day we arrived would be the last day anyone attempted such a thing again. The channel connected within seconds, faster than I expected, as though Grace Whitfield had been waiting for my call rather than simply receiving it. "Commander," she said, and her voice carried none of the triumph I might have expected from someone who had just dismantled the largest fleet in Thessari history without a single act of destruction. I am listening. I do not understand how this was possible, I said, and I found I no longer had the will to disguise the honesty in the question. Explain it to me, not as a negotiator speaking to a defeated enemy, but plainly, as one commander might explain a victory to another. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, there was something almost gentle in her tone, the way a person speaks when delivering a truth they know will be difficult to accept. Our history is not one of unity, Commander. You will have read that in whatever files your scouts compiled. We fought each other for most of our recorded existence, over land, over belief, over pride. But somewhere in the last century, we learned something that no single government ever needed to teach the rest of us. We learned that peace between ourselves did not mean safety from beyond ourselves. Every nation that built a satellite built it with the quiet understanding that one day, something like your fleet might arrive, and there would be no time left to prepare once it did. So you prepared before you had a name for the threat, I said. We prepared before we even knew whether a threat existed at all, she said. It became habit, Commander. A researcher, building a listening array for distant stars, would design it with a second function, quietly, without instruction, simply because caution had become part of how our species built things. A cargo company routing ships through old debris fields would map every object twice, once for navigation, once for the possibility that debris might someday need to become something else. No single order created this network. No single leader designed it. It grew the way caution grows in any people who have learned, through painful experience, that comfort is never permanent. I considered her words carefully, turning them over against everything I had witnessed in the past hours. 12,000 ships, disabled not through weapons but through patient, decades-long preparation disguised as the ordinary clutter of a divided civilization. You allowed us to observe you for 2 years before this campaign, I said. You allowed us to catalog your species as fractured and unprepared. Was that also part of this design? Your scouts saw what our species has always shown to outsiders who underestimate us, she said. Division, disagreement, noise. It has never once been the whole truth. It has simply been the part of the truth we did not mind an outsider seeing. I looked at Doran, standing silently beside me, his expression carrying the particular stillness of someone absorbing a lesson that would shape the rest of his service. I understood in that moment that whatever happened in the remaining hours of this encounter, neither of us would ever again approach an unfamiliar species with the same certainty we had carried into this system. What happens now? I asked. Now, Commander, you make a choice, Grace Whitfield said. Your fleet remains where it is, disabled but undamaged, every crew member safe, every ship intact. We have taken nothing from you except your ability to act against us. You may continue to resist, and we will continue to hold your fleet exactly as it is for as long as necessary. Or you may choose to withdraw, and we will restore full function to every vessel under your command the moment the last ship crosses beyond the boundary of this system. You would simply let us leave, I said, disbelief coloring my voice despite my effort to sound composed. After everything you have shown us here, you would allow 12,000 warships to return home intact, carrying the knowledge of everything you have done. We are not interested in your destruction, Commander, she said. We are interested in your understanding. A defeated fleet that limps home in silence teaches its people nothing except the desire for revenge. A fleet that returns intact, carrying the full truth of what happened here, carrying commanders who witnessed it firsthand and can explain it clearly to those who sent them, teaches something far more valuable. It teaches caution. I stood in silence for a long moment, considering the strange, unfamiliar logic of a species that had chosen restraint at the exact moment it held absolute power over its enemy. In 187 campaigns, I had never once offered a defeated world the choice to leave with dignity intact. I had never considered that such a choice might be a more effective form of victory than annihilation. I require time to consult with my remaining officers, I said. "Take what time you need, Commander," she said. "We are not in a hurry. We have already waited far longer than a single conversation." The channel closed, and I turned to Doran, who had listened to every word without interruption. "What do you believe we should do?" I asked him, because I found I trusted his judgment more in that moment than any doctrine I had been trained under. "I believe," he said slowly, "that we came here to conquer a world we did not understand, and we are being offered the rare chance to leave it, having finally understood something true. I do not believe the Dominion will thank us for bringing home a story of restraint rather than conquest. But I believe it is the only true story we have to bring." I gathered what remained of my command staff, the officers who had served beside me through campaigns that had once felt glorious, and now felt, in the clear light of this single encounter, small and unearned. I told them what Grace Whitfield had offered, and I watched the same understanding settle over each of their faces that had settled over my own hours earlier. We had not been defeated by a larger fleet, a stronger weapon, or a braver enemy. We had been defeated by patience, by a species willing to spend generations preparing quietly for a single day, and by our own certainty that no one could ever refuse the word we had delivered so many times before. I opened the final channel myself, as tradition demanded, though this time the tradition felt entirely different from the one I had followed at the very beginning of this campaign. "Grace Whitfield," I said, "this is Commander Vren Koth Solu of the Thessari Second Armada. My fleet will withdraw from your system, in full, beginning immediately." "Thank you, Commander," she said, and I heard for the first time something that sounded almost like relief in her voice, as though she too had hoped this would be the outcome rather than simply expected it. "Your ships will regain full function as they cross the system boundary, exactly as promised." "I have one further request," I said, "though I do not ask it as a condition of our withdrawal. I am listening." "I wish to understand why you extended this mercy at all," I said. "You held every advantage. You could have destroyed us entirely, or held us here indefinitely, and no power within the Dominion could have done anything to stop you. Why choose restraint?" She considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because a fleet destroyed teaches its empire only that this world must be avoided out of fear. A fleet spared teaches its empire that this world need not be feared at all, only respected. We would rather be respected, Commander. Fear fades with time and empires forget. Respect, when it is earned honestly, tends to last considerably longer." I found I had no answer to offer her that would not sound hollow against the plain honesty of her own. I gave the order for withdrawal, and I watched over the following hours as 12,000 ships, one by one, regained their function precisely as she had promised, each vessel crossing the boundary of the system and rejoining the greater darkness beyond, carrying crews who would return home with a story none of them had expected to tell. I remained on the command deck long after the last of my ships had crossed the boundary, watching the small blue and green world shrink behind us until it became indistinguishable from the countless other points of light scattered across the dark. I thought of the 187 campaigns that had come before this one, each ending in the same familiar word, spoken by species who had never imagined refusing us. I thought of how certain I had been, delivering that same word to Earth, that this campaign would end exactly as all the others had. I closed my final log entry for this campaign with words I had never expected to write, and words I suspected the Dominion would not welcome with any enthusiasm. Command sent me to conquer a fractured world, certain that division meant weakness. I return instead having learned that a species which chooses to prepare quietly, patiently, and thoroughly, without ever needing a single voice to command it, may be the most dangerous kind of enemy any fleet can encounter. I carry no conquest home with me. I carry only a single unavoidable truth for the Dominion to consider carefully before it ever again looks toward that small blue world and mistakes its quiet for weakness.